I'm getting started with a quote from a good friend of mine who was a faculty member here for a couple of years. He's now at UC Berkeley. His name is Dr. Michael Dumas. And I talked with him about recruiting. I know some of you are here in that regard as well. And so today I'll be presenting my research specifically, largely because we didn't get the word out to kind of change the topic. So I'm still staying with that. So some folks wanted to come and hear that piece. But then we'll also have some time, I would say the last 20 or so minutes, we'll have some time to brainstorm some ideas about courses, recruiting, scholarship, and how we incorporate Black research into what we do here at Cal State Long Beach. So Dr. Dumas said, I'm going to read this quote here, "The College of Education has to think about how it embraces and defends Blackness, and only in that context does it make sense to recruit Black students. And even then, they have to realize that schooling is a site of Black suffering. Not only suffering, but suffering most assuredly. And they have to commit to fighting that in all its manifestations." And as the saying goes from New York, Dr. Dumas also has been at NYU, although he's from the West Coast. There's no half-stepping if you follow Big Daddy Kane, but most of y'all ain't that old, so I'll just leave that cultural reference there. So I'm transitioning PowerPoints here, and we'll get into the main topic that was at least sent out to everyone. So, Black parents' perspectives on school psychology. I've been wanting to have those conversations for a while, and as a faculty member, I've developed my research agenda, at least now over the next 5 years, maybe next decade, on talking with Black parents about their experiences. So I'll get into some of the reasons why I chose this topic, but let's get right into it because I don't got a lot of time. This is kind of a 3 or 4 hour workshop. I'm condensing down to 40 minutes. Right?
Hey, Brenda, I apologize. I have to be recorded today.
That's all good. That's all good. That's why I'm recording, because I ran into a bunch of people yesterday. Said, "Oh, I'd love to make it." I said, "All right, I'll help you out." So, W.B. Du Bois. You know, if you're a Black scholar, Cornell West. When I was in graduate school, in one of his books, he said, "If you're a Black scholar, you have to go through Du Bois for sure." And this is one of the things he talked about, and I find this quite often in doing research with Black folks and kind of the questions that people ask me, and we'll come back to Du Bois, but I wanted to kind of start here. They approach me in a half-hesitant sort of way, eye me curiously and compassionately, and then instead of saying directly, "How does it feel to be a problem?" they say, "I know an excellent colored man in my town," or "I fought in Mechanicsville," or "Do not these Southern outrages make your blood boil?" And positioning the conversation in that way about being a problem limits kind of the scope of where we can go sometimes. Because if I'm only trying to solve a problem, I'm not necessarily trying to build anything or be aware of something larger. So the topics today, and I'm sorry this part is so small. When I transferred the slides, it got small, but here we are. Parents in California in general. I was going to talk about San Diego, but I had to leave that out. That's where I grew up. So Larry P. ruling in a policy as a passive microaggression, and I'll get into that in a moment. Disproportionality, Black student assessment, and the California Association of School Psychologists. The study itself we'll get into and some of the results. What I'm most excited about, and I'm sure many of y'all are here today to help discuss some resources in the community and literature and brainstorm some ideas. So California's Black student enrollment has dropped, and it's been a steady decrease. I'm expecting even more of a decrease. Given the current election, maybe some economic trends may be related to all those different pieces. But what I know, since I moved back to California from Alabama when I was an undergraduate in '95, there's been a steady decrease of African American students enrolled in public schools. Okay. One of the areas of concern, so I'm a school psychologist, we look at special education, and I'm going to go through these different pieces there. So you see under MR or ID, used to be the term was mental retardation, now it's intellectual disability. African American students make up 10.3%. So if we look at the enrollment, 6.3, that's a high enrollment. It's not the highest, but it's a high enrollment. I'll just move over to autism, 7.4%. Right. So African Americans are slightly overrepresented in those two areas. Go next to SLD, which is almost twice as likely to be enrolled, and that's a pretty subjective category. That's a specific learning disability. Another one that's very wide open is other health impaired. And that can be many different things, but most often it's something like ADHD. Okay? And the last one is ED. Okay? And as you can see, that's 3 times as likely for African American students to be enrolled in ED, or what's called emotional disturbance type classrooms. Okay? It'll be labeled in that way. So, and one slide I don't have, it shows that African Americans only make up about 2% of school psychologists. And along with those declining numbers for African Americans as school psychologists, we also have declining numbers for teachers. And that's a whole nother presentation I give, but that's been a big concern, the declining number of African American teachers. Okay. So, and I just kind of got into some of these pieces. I want to move ahead. So cognitive dissonance, if you're not familiar with Frantz Fanon, I think these are the types of times where you should be, definitely. He was a psychiatrist, but also a freedom fighter from France, getting rid of colonialist France and Algeria. Okay. So he talks about cognitive dissonance here, and sometimes people hold a core belief that is very strong. When they're presented with evidence that works against that belief, the new evidence cannot be accepted. It would create a feeling that is extremely uncomfortable called cognitive dissonance, and because it is so important to protect the core belief, they will rationalize, ignore, and even deny anything that doesn't fit in with their core belief. Now, I've done this presentation particularly about learning disabilities in many different places. One of them was the old school district where I used to work, and someone even asked me, where did you get these numbers? I said, well, they're readily available at the California Department of Ed. And this is kind of a common thing. When you present this type of information, cognitive dissonance comes up, and people will rationalize why those numbers are there. They're there. They've been around for a while. My question is, what are we doing about it? But let me get into a little bit of the history of the California Association of School Psychologists and Association of Black Psychologists. If you look on the left part of your screen, that's the California Association of School Psychologists. And this has been kind of their position when it comes to African American student placements. Okay? And it said it's discriminatory to black youth to not have access to proper testing. Why? And I just want you to hold on to your hats here. We just talked about cognitive dissonance. There's been a test ban. Okay? You're not supposed to give IQ tests to black students in the state of California. That's been that way since about the late 70s, but it even started in the early 70s. But by the late 70s, it was pretty codified into education practice in California through different memos and other things. 1997 was the last time a memo came out regarding this. But most of the California school psychologists' efforts have been, we're concerned about proper testing. So school psychologists should have the latest tools, and freedom to use them is what many of the members of the California Association of School Psychologists have said. So there's been a near 20-year hiatus from collaboration with the Association of Black Psychologists, and it wasn't until 2013 at one of our CASP institutes that we brought a school psychologist, William Thomas, and he was around during the 70s as a school psychologist, but it's very rare you had members of CASP and AB-Psy. There was a huge split. Okay. And for those of us who teach, for those of us who do recruitment, I've ran into a group of school psychologists this last convention, African-American school psychologists. I'm sitting with about a dozen of them. And I asked them if they've heard of the Association of Black Psychologists, and they all said no. I'm sitting with 12 black school psychologists who already have their degrees. They've gone through graduate school, and nobody said, hey, there's an Association of Black Psychologists. Some of it is because of this unique history, I think. So CASP didn't want to talk about AB-Psy, and I don't know if AB-Psy didn't want to talk about CASP, but it's not getting filtered to the students so they have access to information. This is a big piece of how I ended up here. So Association of Black Psychologists position, and they have a position paper that's fairly lengthy on special ed at least. Black youth are overrepresented in special ed classes. Alternatives to IQ testing and placement should be developed and refined, and they've had that position for over 40 years. And they haven't collaborated with CAS. Conversely, up until recently in 2012 at AB-Psy in Los Angeles, the CAS president present. And at the time, I was the California Association of School Psychologists president. One of the few people who's a member of both organizations, and I've been a member since I was in graduate school for 20 some odd years. But I've been trying to bring them together to address some of these issues. So CASP has made some efforts to connect with parents in the 1980s, but it focused primarily on trying to convince parents that the school psychologist view made the most sense. So we sought out like-minded parents who thought that IQ tests were great for GATE and college entrance and good science, but most of these parents had gone to Harvard or Yale, teaching at the UC schools. They weren't necessarily parents who were sending their kids to public schools. And politically, the California Association of School Psychologists never had a strong connection with black parents or community groups, and particularly AB Psy. So, and they were consistently, they were the constituency that brought the winning lawsuit against a black superintendent of California, Mr. Riles. So if you've ever heard of this lawsuit, Larry P. versus Riles. Larry P. was a group of about 6 black parents who were suing San Francisco Unified School District for placing too many black students in special ed. And just to give you even the real condensed version, there were people who were trained over a weekend to give IQ tests, and they went out and then they did it. And they were placing too many black kids, so they had the 6-hour retarded child. So they were retarded at school, but when they went home, they're taking care, they're making change, they're taking care of their other family members, they're going to church and memorizing all these long memory verses. There's no way they could have been, but there was poor training, which impacted the practice in California. So since 2013, CAS, we're making efforts here, trying to undo a 40-year history to make connections with AB Psy members. Okay, so I just pause here for some of these thoughts here, and this is kind of what I've heard talking with black parents and school psychologists. Anytime you talk about IQ tests, it's a microaggression. If you're familiar with Steele's work on stereotype threat, just even saying the word IQ test, that this is measuring your intelligence, can lead to lower test scores, but this whole idea of a microaggression. I'm sure most of y'all are familiar with the term, but if you haven't, I'll go through it here a little bit. Who hasn't really gotten to this term yet? It's all right if you haven't. Okay, all right. Okay, so this microaggression, this kind of parting of the ways has led to an approach avoidance, right? And it describes the internal mental debate, sometimes called a conflict, that weighs the pros and cons of differing situations that have both good and bad elements. Martin Luther King would call that the paralysis due to analysis. He was fond of using that term when it came to moving social movements forward. So school psychologists would state, well, this Larry P. memo states I cannot give a black child an IQ test, yet the parents have consented for my assessment. And if you don't have a handout, they're sitting right in the middle of the table here. So what do I do? And I get this a lot. The other thing I get from school psychs who should be scientific about it, they tell me that I feel better if I have an IQ test to give. Or if you tell me what the right IQ test is, I would actually feel better. And I have them state it out loud again to me. You feel better with the test. That's science. It's not necessarily about how you feel. It's about what you'll be able to effectively do. So for black parents, my child needs help, but I don't know anything about these tests. And on top of that, I hear they give my child an alternative test because they're black. And this leads to more questions and less trust of the whole system. So meeting with black parents, there's all kinds of layers. When black parents do not make it to the school, there's trust issues, some of which they have not discussed since they were in school. As we kind of started off, for those of you here earlier, I talked about Michael Dumas and his kind of viewpoint of we have to consider the suffering that's gone on in schools, either generationally or personally, particularly if we're recruiting students to come to a place like the College of Ed, right? Socioeconomic factors as well. And I see it all across the board where I'm talking about like generational wealth. The administrator's driving like a luxury vehicle, right? And sometimes there may be a staff assistant who's driving a luxury vehicle. They might even go to the same church or the same lodge. And there's all these interpersonal dynamics that are at play when a parent comes up to the school. Right? Okay. A basic is that the parents and educators run in very different social circles, but meet to talk about children. And they are often missing each other when they have those conversations. Handouts in the middle. Good to see you. All right. So I've really been a focus on accountability versus test kits. I'm just going to mention 3 districts, and y'all can read this later if you like. But LA, San Diego, and Mount Diablo Unified have been 3 districts that have shown, with or without test kits, that they can hold school sites accountable based upon either individual psychometric accountability, based upon school site and administrator accountability, to ensure that there's not a discriminatory process. It hasn't been about the test kits. It's been about consistent accountability. So I'm going to transition here, and I'm trying to watch my time here because it's just got a short amount of time. I get so excited about this stuff. All right, so Dr. Harold Stevenson, who I had a chance to become Facebook friends with. Man, I love Facebook for this reason. Right? I get a chance to interact with these folks. So I'm reading all the time, right? So he wrote this article in School Psychology Review a while ago, and it just kind of always stuck with me. And he talked about black ways of being. And he says, all bodies of water are not the same. If you track their currents, temperatures, salt content, or role in the lives of the continents and people, they boundary. Yet these bodies of water constitute a common substance, and the same exists among African Americans in a cultural urban context. When we know more about the technology of the scientific collaboration and partnership and less about the humanity of the people who make up these partnerships, we are contributing to a technology of missing data creation. So I mentioned before about how that Larry P. Court case came about. People took a weekend class, and we found that out through CASP and doing like kind of an oral history of what was going on at the time. So people took a weekend class and were focused on the mechanics. And every time we come back to the test kits and focus on the mechanics, we miss out on what's happening with the parents and what's happening with the child and what's happening with people specifically. All right. Just pausing on that quote, I think about Flint, Michigan every time I read it. Mm-hmm. Right? Or Katrina. Right? Okay. So Eve talks about suspending damage. If you have not read her work, that's a good place to begin. If you're thinking outside of where things have, if you're looking at a social movement and it's been stuck. So I'll just pause here because she's talking about the doll test with Kenneth and Mamie Clark. Mm-hmm. Anyone familiar with them? Mm-hmm. Nerdy psychologists, right? They get married in graduate school, and then like 10 years later, they're doing the doll tests, and they're handing black children white dolls and black dolls and seeing which one they choose, and that's made into an amicus brief and given to the Supreme Court so they make their decision regarding Brown versus Board of Education, right? Dr. Clark was also one of my fraternity brothers, so I keep track of like all the cool stuff he did. And I found that out just researching one day. I'm like, wow, it's Dr. Clark. So Eve Tuck is kind of pulling apart all my heroes here, which I like. So I invite you to join me in revisiting research in our communities, not only to recognize the need to document the efforts of oppression on our communities, but also consider the long-term repercussions of thinking of ourselves as broken. Right? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of damage-centered research. Sometimes it's just even cataloging what's wrong with a group of people. Okay? Whether we say terms like at risk, or they're not thriving, or they're not graduating, or they're being pushed out. I think there's room for that, but there's definitely room for going beyond the damage-centered research. Okay? And one alternative to that is to craft our research to capture desire instead of damage. So a desire-based framework is an antidote to damage-centered research. So I did want to talk with parents about what their experiences were like, whether they were good or bad, but I also wanted to talk with them about what they would like to see, right? And Dr. Sean Harper has done a good job of that. Ta-Nehisi Coates has done a great job of that. If you've read either one of their work, or if you haven't, I encourage you to check out their work. So the purpose of this study was to learn more about parents' self-reported attributes of school psychologists, as well as experience in the schools with educators and our other mental health providers in the schools. So I asked 9 open-ended qualitative questions. And the reason why, for those of y'all kind of wondering about us qualitative researchers, I like being kind of asking those brand new questions, right? Nobody's asked black parents what their experience is like with school psychologists. I looked far and wide. There's been a couple with mental health providers. Nancy Boyd Franklin, she had a book called Black Families in Therapy, and she's updated that, but she hasn't done anything for 10 years with it. So this was kind of a new conversation. The other piece is I'm politically kind of bringing these different groups together. So CAS, we have a Cultural Linguistic Diversity Committee, and it's only been around since the 90s. Prior to that, we really didn't have a frame or structure that looked at culturally relevant type questions. I wanted to get CSU faculty because this is a statewide problem, so I got some input from Sacramento State, Cal State LA, San Diego State on the questions. And then also members of the Association of Black Psychologists residing in California, one of which wrote the position paper in special ed for the Association of Black Psychologists. Right. So I took a convenient sample from different churches, then I got all churched out, and I went to social media. Historically black fraternities, and ended up with 34 parents. One couple just insisted on answering it together, which was great. Recorded and transcribed, and I want to, for those of y'all that know Angela Locks, I wanted to thank her because she hooked me up with the University Research Opportunity Program. So I have 2 freshman students who've been helping me transcribe the data. Nice. And it's been really exciting because both of them have family members with either learning disabilities or autism. And so their understanding of the material, I'm almost convinced, one, that he's going to be a college professor. He's switching to school psych. He's computer science. We're done with that. He's going to be a college professor. Right. So, and we're doing content analysis. I'm not a big fan of grounded theory, but we may come back to that. But that's just me. I put that out there. All right, so demographics, age range from 26 to 60 years old. Most respondents were between 38 to 48. Most of them were African American. Good percentage were Caribbean or stated black. 2 white parents who had mixed race children, a Filipino mother and an African American father. Those were the 2 that answered. Latino was kind of 0.5 because she felt she was Caribbean as well. Interesting mix of ethnicity, therefore black is definitely diverse. So 15 men and 18 women. If I hadn't tracked down my fraternity brothers, I wouldn't have had as high a range of men answering. Marital status, half of them were married, some divorced, some single, remarried. Half of the respondents had a combination of 1 boy and 1 girl. 8 had 2 boys, 4 families had more than 3 girls, 1 family had 5 kids. Schooling was mostly public. My first go-round of interviews were private, and I hit right at 10, and I was like, okay, no more private school people. And then one of them snuck in, one more. 0.5 did a homeschool, so we had somewhat of a good mix. Education, mostly master's degrees, some bachelor's, doctorate, a highly educated sample. Some of them work in education. And I keep trying to have the education folk out, but they keep coming back in. They really want to answer these questions. They heard about it. They're like, oh, man, a couple of them tracked me down. Like, I really got to talk to you about my experience. I'm like, great, let's do it. Medical or mental health, government and military were some of the other backgrounds. And at first I was concerned that education was overrepresented, but I'm thinking, this is somewhat of a good sample because these are our colleagues talking back to us. When they're talking back to us as black parents, but also as educators. So in a pretty stable workforce, right? Working 20 plus years, about half of them were 10 to 15 years in the same field or same job. Okay. All right, so the research questions, what general types of support or help do black parents think of, help for their child, social emotional or family support? How do black parents perceive the role of school psychologists? If they do have experience with one, what's the quality of that experience? And what do black parents expect of school psychologists in workshops? And I may change one of these because I got kind of an interesting piece out of the advocacy, but we'll get to that in just a moment. So these are the 9 questions here, and I'll go through some of that. And I'll just stop with the top 3 here, and we'll move through each one. But the reasons parents would contact the school psych: bullying or behavioral socialization or academics. And I added one in there in regards to speech and language services. In general, struggles or no progress. Yeah. So you notice the gate one down there? That was totally different than what Cass had been talking about. But they did a whole article on that. But black parents aren't necessarily, at least their responses in this group weren't concerned with that. Experience with the school psych, 13 had interactions with school psych. So I'm doing positive, negative, and then still like, I'm really not undecided or just, it wasn't good or bad. It just was. All right. So most of the folks who had interaction with the school psychologist, it was positive, but still there's another half that weren't too keen on it. IEP testing, ADHD eval was another group. Again, similar kind of mixed reaction. 8 had no interaction with the school psychologist. And I thought these were going to be the private school parents, but these were not all the private school parents. A lot of the private school parents had interactions with school psychologists. Okay. And some of them I would even ask, I'm talking about school psychologists, and this is a personal point of pride for school psychs. We often get called school counselors, but they were like, no, I'm going to talk about the school counselor anyways. Or I'm going to talk about the psychiatrist. I'm like, no, really? School psych? You ever heard of us? No, I'm talking about the psychiatrist. So, or the outside clinician. So, still not as much positive as I think school psychs would like to see in regards to our interactions with parents, at least amongst the reports. And if they didn't state it specifically, I asked them specifically at the end, was it a positive or negative experience? And they were able to tell me either yes or no or sideways. Key contact about the concerns at the school. So this may be more broad to some things that you're concerned about. African-American parents, if they had a concern at school, they're most likely going to talk to the teacher or the principal or the school counselor. I was happy school psychologists were even in the mix, right? Some other interesting ones like a lawyer, district, or even a state representative. One parent was just, I got them on the phone, and I'll call him. But he used to be in Marine Corps colonel. That's just how he operates. Right. So yeah. Okay. Key contact about home impacting school. Now this one was a slight difference in regards to sharing our personal family business. Right. School psychologists came out on top. I was surprised by this one, that folks would be willing to talk to a school psychologist if there was something impacting them, particularly and then next the teacher, school counselor, the principal. So that's interesting to me that the principal wouldn't be as high as they were before, right? So that whole confidentiality piece, I think, is a big deal. And so school psychs are kind of represented in that regard. Some parents just are not feeling talking to anybody about any family stuff. I know that's kind of how I was brought up, and I was brought up with 2 teachers who are parents. My dad was on the school board. He was not talking with anybody about any of our family stuff. All right. Who's an advocate in addition to yourself? Right. Teachers, principal, school counselor. Notice how the school psychologist drops all the way down, not seen as an advocate, only by one person. Okay. And that parent had a child with autism, so they spent a lot of time with the school psychologist. But in math, got 3 mentions. Anybody math teachers? Both my parents were math teachers, so I know they're going to be excited to read this. Right. What would you want to communicate to school psychologists? And this one's a little bit broader, so I had to kind of pull some different themes together, but they discuss social and cultural development at school with parents. This is what they wanted to communicate with the school psychologist. If parents could sit down with them, they discuss teen culture with parents and teachers, like bullying, media, sexuality, profanity. Some parents went in like personal details about stories that they had with their kids and kind of the interactions they had with other kids. Discuss with teachers and parents general psychological awareness, the stigma, the role of school psych theories, career and college readiness, teacher and child interaction, and parent-child. And special ed is way down there. I'm thinking it might have made it maybe in the middle, but only 1 mention. Notice there's nothing about like discipline, right? A lot of times when I see research on black youth, it's about discipline issues, right? There's some stuff about bullying, but it's not framed in that way. It's more like we're all kind of here. How can we interact and how can we teach our kids to interact better? So the parents, to me, they're suspending that damage, right, as they answer. What would you want to discuss with other parents? Right? General problem solving from year to year. One parent had a really great idea about bringing back alumni to come and talk, and I know at a couple of my daughter's schools, that's a regular occurrence, that alumni parents come back and talk at different meetings. May not cost a whole lot more to do, right? But it could be much more impactful. General administrative issues like class size, supplemental programs, charter schools coming up. This is, at least for me, as I'm thinking down the road, right? Not only charter schools and being run by corporations, but the supplemental programs are being run by corporations. I went to one school district to go visit one of my interns, and they were all privately ran. The school didn't have any supplemental programs that were run mainly by district staff. Right? Summer transition programs and other things. Academics still a little lower. Some other concepts there, like village respect and how to raise other kids, kid life, curriculum. I had one mention of Common Core, and I think that was about it. How can school psychs be a voice for your child? Encourage children to love school. Right? Help teacher attitudes towards children. Right? Ensure Black voices as well as unique cultural voices of all students are heard. Have positive conversations and respect, bully-free and drug-free, holistic education. Some parents still were like, I'm not buying that school psychs can even think to speak for me and my child, so no. And I followed up, but they were, no, just mean, that's it. Get to know the parent before they call CPS or Child Protective Services and safety. So some of the other things, kind of themes that parents had direct quotes I liked that help with group dynamics overall. So a couple of parents said, school psychs don't need to be running around everywhere at 3 to 5 different schools. They were at one school or 2 schools, I can have more access to them and they can do more of this kind of stuff. And they were insisted that they couched their conversations in that way. Right? Also, build me up without tearing me down. That was another conversation. And there seems to be a lot of that. I don't know if you've seen in the news, there was an aide who put a young, like a 10-year-old boy in the hospital, broke his jaw, popped out his teeth, slammed him on the ground, right? And I do a thing in my classroom management course where I review a few cases where either teachers or aides have kind of gone out of control and not, you remember, you were in the class, right? But there's certain conditions that are created, right, and allowed to kind of go on, kind of that zero tolerance mindset. Some of that's still out there, and some of it's still happening, whether in charter schools or general comprehensive public schools, and they're not having those conversations. But I think some of the conversations that parents were talking about speak to those things. Workshop topics. So, and I think this is kind of the most portable piece of it, and I'm encouraging school districts when I'm going out to present. I've done San Diego. I'm going to be going to Riverside. I'm hoping to go to a couple of districts up north and talking to them to maybe ask just even this basic question: what type of workshop topics would Black parents like to see? So they're developing relationships with them. Parent-child communication improved, social skills, EQ, kind of this emotional quotient, depression and suicide, those types of things, academics and career, special ed needs, services and rights, and then you can see the rest there. So I wanted to just give you a couple resources before we start brainstorming here, but as you're thinking about planning and connecting with folks when it comes to either in your classes or as students, if you're doing research, the Journal of African American Males in Education, that's free, it's online, you can just look it up. Every article is there. Journal of Negro Education, if you're a student here at Cal State Long Beach, you got access to it. As long as you're a student or a faculty member, you got access to it. Dr. Ivory Tolchin, who is brilliant, he writes an editorial almost every day, he's another one of my Facebook friends. Love his stuff. Right. And I've been a reviewer for the Journal of Negro Ed for a little while. Journal of Black Psychology, they have a new editor. They've had one who was real tight, only did empirical studies, nobody got in. I couldn't get in because I'm qualitative. He only wanted the gold standard studies, but Dr. Beverly Van Dever is the new editor, and so we're looking to kind of open that up. But The Journal of Black Psychology has been around for 40 years. Journal of Negro Education been around for over 100 years. Journal of Pan-African Studies is another online journal you can have direct access to. And from time to time, they do issues about youth or schooling. And then also consider Cal State Long Beach Black Themes, Dissertations, and Thesis. This is where I'm getting most of my lit review for this study and the questions I'm working on. Riverside County. So if you're looking for African American achievement, high success in the state, Riverside County is where it's happening, particularly Norco and Corona school districts. All right. One of my good friends, he moved from Moreno Valley, got an apartment. They lived in a huge house in Moreno Valley, got an apartment so he can be in Norco school district. So his son can not only play basketball, but also have good academics there. Because they Centennial High, like they recruit from Centennial High in Corona, not just for the athletics, it's for the academics. Particularly the UCs come straight there. So my little nephew, he's 6'5", but he's on his way to UC Davis, right? And some of it comes from a real clear intention in Riverside about a blueprint for action. Another kind of connected family piece, my daughter, we live in Orange County, right? But she hears about it from her friends that they're having an African-American graduation celebration for high school students. So from the Inland Empire, but there's kids coming from LA, San Diego, all the way to this high school African-American graduation. Why? Because there's scholarships there. They're connecting with other kids who are on their way to college, either HBCUs or medical school, which my daughter's a pre-med major. All that is happening, exciting stuff happening in Riverside. So Black Parent Advisory Groups. I found at least 15, but these are some that are not too far from us or somewhat relevant. So Long Beach has one, and I forgot to put theirs down as well. Long Beach has Concerned African American Parents. Some of them are run by the school district, like there is a job designated specifically by the school district. Some of them are run by parent groups that came to kind of challenge the school board on some issues. But these are some that are around Moreno Valley, San Francisco, Unified. I started off with Larry P. To me, that's the most relevant. If San Francisco wants to make some inroads, they're going to need to connect with that group. San Mateo, Council for African American Parents is statewide and also national. So, all right. And I did it. I made it through all those. Cool. So we can have a conversation. All right. So I figured in groups of 3, and maybe we kind of divide this up, right? So I got some faculty. Maybe I'll talk about courses and how you can maybe incorporate literature or other things into your courses. Anyone want to talk about thesis or dissertation students? And then I know some of y'all came specifically to talk about recruitment. So who's doing recruitment? All right. So maybe y'all.
I think maybe a lot of almost all of us.
Yeah, or maybe we take one at a time. Yeah, we have time. So why don't we take like 5 minutes to kind of talk about recruitment ideas, kind of what's coming up in your head, and we'll all talk about it, and then I'll check in with you, see if you want to switch. Right, so let's start with recruitment efforts, and I'm going to turn off my recording. Sorry if you weren't here, but we had a good conversation. Okay, so just a quick follow-up to catch you up on what you missed when we had kind of the brainstorming conversation. We talked mostly about recruitment and different ways to go about recruiting, such as looking at either men's organizations, if we're looking at specifically African-American men recruiting and forming those relationships. Let's say we had a partnership with one of those local organizations, and we say, hey, if we partner with 5 different organizations and they can guarantee at least 2 young men to apply to our university for our education programs every year, and through that partnership, and we support some of what they're doing, we'll at least be guaranteed 10 applicants every year. And that's just one model we were looking at and discussing. The other is the idea that we have to be doing research here at the university, and the university needs to support that type of research where we're focusing in on addressing things like the achievement gap, opportunity gaps, mental health access, to help support students matriculating through K through 12 so we can have more of a pipeline going towards college rather than anywhere else. and we're suspending that damage, but focusing in on what we ultimately want. Also in our relationship with parents and kind of the conversations that we have that they're saying we need help with, and we're providing that support, whether as a university or whether in our partnerships with school districts. Finally, we discussed kind of the barriers to supporting ethnic-specific research, but particularly Black research. So Journal of Black Psychology, Journal of Negro Education, Journal of Black Studies. How are those rated when it comes to retention, tenure, and promotion for faculty, if they publish or are editors of those journals? But also, how are they used in the classroom? Even our own thesis and dissertation, when it comes to working with our courses and providing students good solid theory and evidence-based practices to develop their ideas and their interventions from and on and towards a better future for Black students. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have any questions, you can email me at brandon.gamble@csulb.edu, and I'd be glad to either send you a handout or keep you informed as to the latest with my research. You can follow us on our YouTube channel, Brandon Gamble, or you can also follow me at Brandon Gamble on Facebook or BI Gamble at Twitter. Hope all is well with you, and have a great day.